Great. We're going live. Just let me make sure that it goes through to the YouTube channel, because sometimes that takes a second. And thanks for being here, John. I appreciate it. Takes a second. Oh, here we go. Great. How do I? And thanks for being here, John. I appreciate it. All right. Take mute. Okay, here we go. Okay, we're ready to go. You ready, John? Oh, you're stuck a little bit.
I'm here. I think we're just waiting for Kira.
Can you see me? We might be stuck. Hang on. I'm sorry, guys. Technical difficulties.
Got me back.
Yay, there you are. Okay, sorry, everybody.
That's all right. Sorry,
you sound better and look better.
Cool. Yeah,
even
connection for you too. So
okay,
good to go.
All right, John. Okay, well, we're going live, so let's just get into it. Let's not even belabor the point. We've got people. Let me make sure. Actually, I'll just send this out on the tweets real quick in case people have not gotten in there.
Cool.
So while I'm doing that, will you tell people about yourself, what you do, all that good stuff?
I like long walks on the beach now. So you guys know me from Twitter. Everybody thinks I'm the worst guy in the world.
You're the worst.
I started with the NYPD, had a weird career path. About 12 years into that, started a company, and we became one of the largest at tracking and removing sexual predators, and just to a smaller degree, terror fundraisers and recruiters off of large online communities. I was there in the early days of the internet. So in 2008, sat on something called the Internet Safety Technical Task Force. It was convened at a Harvard Law School, right, with 50 states attorneys general. And we essentially sat in rooms and tried to figure out the best go forward safety policy for the internet. And I did a lot of media, and it wound up being a radio show. I was on air with Newsmax for a few years. About a year ago, got sick of media, doing some production projects now, but went back to what I do, which is business, finance, private equity. It's a lot more relaxing and a lot more money. But I love being on air. You know, I love law enforcement. I still work as much as I can around that world, and rant on Twitter quite a bit, and people get very mad at me. And I've always loved your work. And for the first time in years, we got into a little argument the other day and decided to wind up here and hash it out. So it's good stuff.
I thank you for that, by the way. And for those of you who are here as John fans, let me introduce myself. I'm Kira Davis. I host a podcast, Just Listen to Yourself, with Kira Davis. And I'm also editor-at-large for redstate.com. I've been working in the conservative punditry business for almost a dozen years now. And you can see me. I've been on Newsmax before. I've been on Fox. You just search my name and a bunch of stuff will pop up. I want everyone to know I am not the anime voiceover artist. There's a Kira Davis who's an anime voiceover artist. And I get a lot of her communications. And I'm not the Hollywood producer Kira Davis. There's a Kira Davis that works with Hugh Jackman a lot. And I get a lot of like really lovely letters from actors for her a lot. Like, I love your work. Could you put me in your next production? Oh, it's be like, oh, I'm so sorry. Wrong, Kira. But would you like to be in a conservative video? So John, as he said, gets into it on Twitter. And I think that's putting it mildly. And I noticed him going back and forth with some of my friends on Twitter the other day. So I popped in, but you said something that really got me going. And so I want to get to that. But before we start where we disagree, I want to start with the things we agree on, because I know your work and I know we pretty much agree on.
I think you and I, and not to interrupt you, I think you and I kind of came onto this scene around the same time, right? Like 12 years ago, we both did a lot with the Blaze when it was first starting up. So we've really run on parallel paths. I think we ally on more than we don't.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah.
I totally agree. For instance, we definitely both agree that Gwen Berry should sit her ass at home and not bother going to the Olympics.
I forgot the hammer was a thing. The hammer throw. Come on.
It's actually, but I don't know if you've ever sat and watched. It's pretty impressive. I wish
It's not easy.
I do love to like throw things, and I imagine that would be very powerful. I'm not sure if it was you that tweeted out earlier today, but someone else tweeted out, like, here's the name of the 2 other women that were on the podium. Like, let's know their names. I know not everyone agrees with me, but I just think like it's one thing if you're in the NFL or the NBA, maybe, but when you are competing to represent your country, your flag, like, what is the point? I don't understand. I don't even think it's comparable to what was happening in the 60s. Even those guys stood on the podium and faced their flag. They raised their fists. They didn't bow down in some kind of submissive gesture, or, you know, they took their place and owned it as Americans, right? People might not have liked it, but they were still Americans, and that's kind of what they were saying. Like, I'm American.
But you know, Kira, you go back. Look, nobody's going to sit there and say there weren't times when a stand was needed for race issues or social issues. I mean, it would be intellectually dishonest to say it wasn't needed. But you look at guys like Jesse Owens and Jackie Robinson and guys who did it powerfully with class. And then you look at Gwen Berry, who's a hammer thrower, who wanted her 15 minutes of fame. And you can really see how disingenuous she was. This girl didn't come up like a Jesse Owens or a Jackie Robinson, being forced to, Jackie Robinson couldn't eat in the same restaurants as the white players. He was breaking their records. And this girl has had a charmed life. She's been a collegiate athlete, an Olympic athlete. She's gotten the best training, the best coaching, the best gear, probably first-class travel to and from events. To me, that was pure virtue signaling because she wanted her 15 minutes. She wanted her Kaepernick moment. Very, very different than the people who had to do it because they were truly oppressed in sports. My opinion on that anyway.
I agree. I did an episode of my show on kneeling for the anthem, and I'm not for it, but it was one of the things that, like, my producer and I work for a Black-owned radio station. And my producer and we did not agree on it. I mean, we're like me and you, like, hey, we have these disagreements, it's fine, but I don't like it. And part of it, I think, is because I'm an immigrant myself. Like, I immigrated from Canada, and so I really feel very, very strongly about this country. And
like the whitest, Canada's like the whitest country in the world, Kira.
And it's, you know why I'm an American, John? I'll tell you why. Because of the racism that I experienced in Canada.
It's interesting. You never hear that, right? You never hear that Canada's a racist country.
Nope. Yeah. Every election cycle, when everybody's like, I'm moving up to Canada. There, you took it. And I'm like, no, guess what? Assholes are everywhere. America does not have a lock on assholes, people, please. So I always have to laugh and kind of roll my eyes because I was running away from that to come down here. And honestly, I would say I've experienced much less racism here than I have in Canada. And I would say that's verifiable. But anyways, we're not here to talk about my experience as an ex-Canadian. Here's another thing we both agree on. I think we both agree that Jill Biden is not the president. Jill Biden did not run for office. Why is Jill Biden going to the G7?
I agree. Can we also agree that Tim Hortons coffee sucks?
No, disagree. What? I have friends who will send it to, how very dare you, John. This is not the direction I thought that this conversation was going to take.
Had to go there.
Vitriol.
So what did I say on Twitter that upset everybody? I forgot. I tweet so much.
Well, I'll start with what upset me.
Okay, please.
Before you called me a rhino, why are you always calling people rhinos when they disagree with you? Like, I'm going down your list and I'm like, this is a conservative, this is a conservative, this is a conservative. Why is Cardillo calling this person a rhino?
Hey, it got me on your show, didn't it?
Oh, Lord. See, I knew it. You know what I call that, John? I call that dick shtick.
Okay. All right. So what was it? I forgot what I tweeted like 9,000 times in the last few days. What did I say?
Me too. So, what really got me was, I can't even remember how the conversation started. I'll look it up here in a minute. But what you said, I'm sick of, and I'm paraphrasing, but I feel like I'm getting the gist of it. Yeah. I am sick of talking about how we get the black vote. Trump offered black voters the best
unemployment,
opportunity.
historical unemployment.
Yeah. like the best message that we've had in years, and they still, didn't vote GOP. And I'm done with black voters. Let's stop with this. And I said, well, John, if I was a black liberal reading this, I would say, well, yeah, that's a great reason for me to not come over to the GOP, because look at this guy, he doesn't want me there anyway. And so I guess I had like, one of the questions I had on here was like, do you think that the GOP should be courting the black vote? You made it sound like no.
Yeah, no, I do. And look, Twitter, unfortunately, right, only gives us a certain amount of characters. So it's sometimes hard, but not hard. It's impossible to infuse nuance. And I'm not great with threads. I'm not one of those guys who, I know what I do well on Twitter. People don't typically read threads of mine anyway. I'm a soundbite guy. So I'm glad you asked that. It's important. Yes, the GOP needs to engage minority voters, black voters, Hispanic voters, Asian voters, but it needs to be a grassroots effort. We do these broad strokes, the swaths of policy and messaging, and it gets us nowhere. The GOP isn't going to get anywhere caving on George Floyd statues. We're going to get into that. I know. I don't want to get into it now. They're not going to get anywhere. If you truly want to engage, what the GOP has been horrible at, and like I said, I tweet a lot, but I've been on air for years like you, and tweet a lot. If you go back through my history, either on air in my timeline, I have been, for well over a decade, Kira, very vocally critical of the GOP having horrible grassroots engagement. And I don't think anybody would dispute that. Now, you look at 2016 in Florida. Trump made a concerted effort, and his Florida team made a concerted effort to engage very deeply and very thoroughly with the Haitian community in Miami. And when they did that on the grassroots level, it translated to votes. My point was, rhinos in Congress who are going to capitulate and cave to Dems on critical race theory, on defunding police, and the Republicans won't ever say that, but they'll give a little ground. That will never sway a vote over to the GOP. You need ground troops on the ground, knocking on doors, engaging the voters, explaining to them why the Republican Party is a better alternative than the Democratic Party. Look, crime alone, excuse me, terrible weather here in South Florida, my allergies are nuts. Crime alone is an issue where you can sell black voters, but you need to engage them. Broad sound bites don't work. So that's my criticism. We've seen what works. We watched the Trump campaign do it in 2016, but the GOP en masse isn't applying that. That was my point.
That's very interesting, because that is not the impression that you convey on Twitter. So on Twitter, what I see you saying is black people aren't worth really all of this fuss, and they're not going to come over anyway. So why are we pandering? And why are we like, I think my response to you was, I get, and I've heard this before from many white conservatives, right? Like Trump really did kind of change the game with some black voters, but not as many as we would like. But, Trump was one guy, and he was only going to have at most 8 years in office, and he only got 4. And it doesn't seem fair to decide that just because black voters didn't come over in droves during the Trump administration, that we should somehow abandon them or abandon their, like, what.
No, I agree with you, but both parties, see, you use the right word, pandering. I don't want to pander for votes. Look, I think one of the most insulting things both parties do, let's use the black vote, is treat them like they're moron children. Oh, you can have ID. We know you can. Fuck that. Look, Kira, you're an intelligent woman. You care about what I care about. You want more money in your bank account. You don't want to have to worry about where you go on vacation. You want to live in a safe neighborhood. You don't want terrorists flying planes into buildings. Every American wants that. Both parties pander to minority groups like they're ignorant children. It's frustrating. But you've got an element in every community that's not going to vote. All right? They're not going to vote, but they can't because they have felony convictions. They're not politically engaged, etc. But the problem is both parties pander to that element. There is very little messaging from the Republican Party to the middle class, upper middle class, and affluent black community. We don't do it, nor do the Democrats. Everybody is pandering to the lowest common denominators in every community. to a large degree, especially in the minority communities. That drives me up a wall. And that was also part and parcel to what I mean. Stop trying to sell to people who aren't going to vote for you, and you're abandoning the black executive, the black attorney, the black truck driver who's making 150 grand a year because we have a shortage of truck drivers. That's not who we're communicating to. Instead, they're trying to sell people who historically vote Democrat in West Baltimore that they're going to all of a sudden wake up and have this epiphany and vote Republican, while leaving the parts of the black community, the individuals in the black community who would move over and vote R. And maybe they're not Dems, maybe they're independents, maybe they're NPAs. They're ignoring them. They're buying into the Dem messaging and going for that subset that's never going to vote for them. That's very frustrating.
In the chat, a couple of people said, "Hey, okay, I'll make this a two-parter," and you attack.
Yeah.
Why is it that every time you talk about black people, you talk about criminals? You talk about us as criminals, and doesn't the GOP pander to white people or evangelicals or women?
Two great questions.
Already pander.
Two great questions, and here's my answer for that. And the first one I'm going to address. All right, look. Number one, I'm doing it to a large degree tongue-in-cheek, because every day now we're being told when we wake up as a white man, you're horrible, you're a white supremacist, you're a criminal, you're an oppressor, my last name is Cardillo. I'm a third and fourth generation American. Nobody who immigrated from Italy to New York owns slaves, all right? So I don't buy into that. I don't owe reparations to anybody. I didn't do anything, nor did my ancestors. But let me tell you my problem. And here's my problem. And it's infuriating. Don't call me a white supremacist every day. Don't tell my 16-year-old nephew and my 12-year-old niece in school that they're horrible racists simply because of the way they were born. But more importantly, why doesn't it infuriate the black community that there are statues of George Floyd? I worked in the NYPD only in non-white areas, 99.98%, according to New York City, non-white areas. And you know what I learned, Kira? Only 4 to 6% of those neighborhoods were the criminal element. 94 to 96% of those neighborhoods are hardworking people, great people who we went to work for. This isn't me trying to backpedal. No, these were the people you go to work for. Never heard a cop, myself or any other cop, say, when a call came over that radio with the alert tones, oh, what's the race of the victim? Oh, they're black? Shut the lights off, shut the sirens off, slow the car down. You go there as fast as you would for anyone else because you don't know and you don't care. There was a guy in my command. Let me give you an anecdote. We called him Cuba. He was a dark-skinned Cuban guy, black guy. And his MO, he was a strong arm robber, never used a gun, never used a knife. His MO was he'd wait for the Social Security checks and he would beat the living shit out of elderly people. And I remember one day, this is the late 1990s, mid 1990s, he beat to a pulp an 83-year-old man who was a World War II veteran. And it broke my heart because this guy was beaten up. But you know what the real part of it that really got to me, Kira? This guy said to me, he said, man, 40 years ago, he wouldn't have done that. You know, this guy was telling me he was killing Nazis. Then he went to the Korean War. He'd have beat the living shit out of this punk, but he couldn't do it because now he was 83 and he was frail. I was young, I was impetuous. So I took the bad guy. Nobody would press charges because they were terrified of him because he beat them even worse. And I threw him in a Chinese restaurant dumpster. It was filthy and disgusting, and there were rats, and I handcuffed him in there. Its statute of limitations expired. But you know what? You know what the liberals in the neighborhood cared about? That I did that. They didn't care about the 83-year-old victim. And God forbid I did that today on camera. I'd be fired. I'd be indicted. I'd be prosecuted. The thug would get a statue, and the 83-year-old victims that he was beating the shit out of every month and taking their money, you'd never fucking know their name. Excuse my language. You'd never know their name. Nobody would ever care about them. And if they were beaten to death, nobody would care. They would care more about the thug. That's what infuriates me. And that's what I'm trying to wake people up when I put up these crime stats, because they're not preying on me. I live in a very expensive home in a really expensive area. I carry a gun. I'm a former cop. 90% of the victims of young black men are other blacks. And no one wants to talk about that. And when you talk about it, you're called a racist.
I'm going to stop you there because if you listen to my podcast, I talk about this a lot. I talk about the idea that one of the reasons why I think white conservatives push so hard against this like white supremacist narrative or quote Nazi narrative or whatever, you know, the left is putting out there is because they are so used to being called racist around every corner that just to even acknowledge racism feels like an accusation. And that's what I hear you
point.
saying, that I feel like I'm pushing back, and I get that. Like, I honestly do. I defend, people on my side from this all the time, because I definitely believe that there is prejudice and bigotry there by labeling all white people this one thing. But can't you see that it feels the same way coming from you to us? Like, if all I look at your timeline and it's like these criminals and that criminals, I'm thinking, why is he painting all of us like this? You just said here that most of the people aren't like the criminal, they're like me.
Yeah, but I think that's pretty evident, right?
But
when I post a pic of a criminal. But here's the other problem. Why isn't the Black community policing itself?
That's a good question.
And why am I being called racist for asking that question? Look, I'll tell you this. So I live in a predominantly white area here in South Florida. If one of my neighbors was out there beating up my elderly neighbors, if one of my neighbors was breaking into cars, breaking into homes, raping women, murdering a gang member, I can tell you one thing, all my neighbors would be galvanizing against them, ensuring that they spent the rest of their life in prison. Now, I do understand it. Okay, so that's my 30,000-foot view. As a former street cop, I get it. These people have to live in these neighborhoods with these gangbangers. They have to get off the buses. And there are those micro issues. I drive a nice car. I can pull into my garage behind my gate. I don't have the same security risk as the single mom in that neighborhood walking from the bus to her apartment building. She's fair game in transit if she testifies against these people. But you know what? I work those neighborhoods. There are also some pretty big, fit guys who are law-abiding citizens who can do the job, who can get out there and testify against these people, and they don't. So listen, am I saying that police community relations have always been great? No. Am I saying there's never been racism in the US? No. But at this point, this many years in, this many decades in, one thing is clear. Whether you have proactive policing, whether you have this moronic new Democrat narrative of passive, defunded policing, crime is still ongoing. And it's still disproportionate in Black areas. And the only thing that's going to end that is a proactive Black community. They're going to end it faster than proactive police. But if you ask them to do that, they turn around and call you a white supremacist. Very frustrating.
Okay, I don't know how to respond to the generalization that if you ask them to do it, but I can believe
the community residents. Look,
fair
I'm
enough.
I'm an Italian American. If you were to ask Italian Americans why they didn't galvanize against La Cosa Nostra, they're going to say, because we lived in the neighborhoods, we were afraid they would kill us.
Yeah.
I was one of very few guys in my neighborhood that joined the NYPD. I had cousins and friends who were mobbed up. I get it. I would use them for them as well. I do use it. So I get it at the micro level. But I can tell you one thing, it isn't going to change unless the Black community starts policing itself and cooperating with law enforcement. It just won't.
And is there a world or a situation in which this is perhaps a little bit more nuanced than Black people just finally waking up and we're going to march? Because I always say, like on my show, I always tell people, don't tell me that we're satisfied with this in our neighborhoods. We're not. I go to the back to school parade every year. You don't know that it exists in Gary, Indiana, because you don't live there, and you don't realize that Black people are praying in the streets and marching in the streets and grieved at the violence just the way everybody else.
But I've been to Gary, Indiana. It's a rough area. So I've driven from South Bend to Chicago. I passed through Gary.
Don't stop in Gary.
Yeah.
You don't stop. That's the rule.
Right.
You don't stop in Gary.
Yeah.
But it seems to me that there might be an answer that's a little more complicated than people have to stand up. I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
I realized that I was a conservative one day when I was teaching a program in the inner city. It was like kind of a default Democrat, like a lot of Black people are. And I was with kids, a bunch of kids. I was telling kids, I'm going on vacation. Next week, I'm going to Jamaica. And one kid was like, why are you going to Jamaica? That's where white people go. Why would you go on vacation where white people go? And I was kind of shocked, because I was like, where would they get this? Why would they say this? And then I realized that all of this messaging that I have been giving them up until that point was, look, white people are not going to be your friends. You have everything against you. You're not going to have opportunities to succeed because the system is built against you. And that had been the way I was framing everything. And when she said that, I realized, gosh, that's not helpful. How can I expect? Because the other hand, I'm telling these kids, hey, you work hard and you get out of the hood. You can do this or that. So there was a bigger problem there than just Black people being too ignorant to police themselves. There is a mentality there. There is a feeling of abandonment in the community. And
I'm not saying it's ignorance. I agree with you on that. I think there's a feeling of abandonment. I think there's also a distrust. But look at some of these replies. John is lying. White crime is never mentioned. His police experience has shaped his experience. There's a cognitive dissonance there as well. So you've got a ton of replies here, and you've got a great audience, and it's great. People are coming in, they're engaging. But there's a cognitive dissonance there where they're saying, white guy critiquing the Black community, shutting off, refusing to listen or hear the other side. So that's frustrating as well, right? Because we're being called white supremacists en masse, and not only are we supposed to listen, but academia is supposed to implement CRT. There's supposed to be sweeping public policy that would impact 77% of the population, the white population, and we're just supposed to shut our mouths and listen. But if we dare critique what's going on inside the Black community, we're racist. We're racist. We're derelict. I mean, we're deflecting. We're more biased because we're former cops. Blah, 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 blah. It's both sides. There's guilt on both sides, right?
This is a complicated issue, and I want to take this opportunity. And guys, I don't know John well enough to be assaulting his character like this, so I'm sorry.
No,
I don't like that you came after my friend Asia, though. She's not a rhino. She's one of the few people in California who gets it. So you can go apologize to her, please.
Well, I'm going to tell you, but let me say this about her. I don't know her, but I will tell you this. We're in a very precarious position. I won't support her race. I won't support races in Florida. I won't support races, Kim Klacik, if she runs in Baltimore, because these races are mathematically impossible to win.
I hate this, John.
Asia, but
I hate this. How do you flip a seat if you don't get in there in a district?
Because my dear, you flip a seat that's +5. Her seat is +30 Democrat. You can't do it.
But is there such a thing as a long-term strategy?
Not when the same candidate keeps raising the same amount of money and 70% of it's going to the same consultants and they're delivering the same 30-point losses. This is not a slight on her. I'm going to put out a list of about 20 candidates. Guys like Ned Ryan and I discuss this all the time. Plenty of Black strategists and I discuss this all the time. We're in a precarious position in this country. We need to take there's a finite amount of donor dollars out there, right? Whether they be large donor dollars or small dollar donations. Those donor dollars need to go to candidates who can win. Take a Black candidate, Byron Donalds, the one here in Florida. He's outstanding. Put your money to a guy like that. He's got a tremendous future in politics in the Republican Party. Put your money in that race. But giving money to Asia, who's got a 30-point disparity, Laura Loomer with a 20-point disparity, Kim Klacik, a 38-point disparity. You're taking money from good candidates who can win, and you're putting it into races that can't possibly be won. This is not about
we don't look ahead. It's about the math today. But if you don't have a vision for the future, how do you win the future?
You need that effort in those areas first. You need the grassroots. The grassroots engagement effort in those areas before you spend money on candidates.
Okay,
you just do.
I think it's actually that's a good point, and I think it's a twofold situation. And I often lambaste the GOP for not getting in there and but I will say that I'll address some of these criticisms here, and you can respond. So one of the things is that the reason why Kim Klacik or Asia is going to lose so heavily is because they're Republicans in a Democrat district, a district that is largely Black. So while you're saying don't go, it's a waste of time, what I hear you saying is the Black vote is a waste of time. We're never going to get it. Why are we going to invest in it?
I don't want to interrupt you. Let me stop you there. No, what I'm saying is this. When you have a race, I don't care if it's a white neighborhood, an Asian district, an Asian district, Hispanic district, Black district. Indian district, Native American district, I don't care. Do not send millions of dollars to a candidate who can't win. Let the candidate get a few big donors and go out there and engage. But also, Kira, and we agree on this, if you look at how their dollars are being spent, their consultants are making millions to put up internet ads that inner city Blacks aren't watching. Their consultants are spending millions on fundraisers out of state at country clubs that the poor African Americans in their district aren't attending. I'm sorry, but I'm right on this one. It's a waste of money. None of that money is, listen, if an Asia or a Kim Klacik raised $5 million and all they did was throw events in their district, and they brought people in and they fed them and they helped them out and they engaged with them and they sat with them. And you know why Debbie Wasserman Schultz wins right now? I'm in Ted Deutsch's district here in South Florida. But do you know why Debbie Wasserman Schultz wins and no Republican can touch her? It's not because she's exceptional. She sucks. She's kind of boring. Here's why she wins. Because when a Republican comes in, even when they raise money, they make the same dumb mistake. They go and hire these consultants. And this is an all-white district. I'm going to have the same criticism. They go and they hire these consultants and they put fancy ads on TV and they do internet ads and they throw fundraisers at country clubs and all. You know what Debbie does? Debbie understands that the crux of the vote in her district are the elderly, and the super voters are elderly Jewish retirees from the Northeast. So she buys kosher sandwiches on trays and goes and sits with them in the retirement communities day in and day out and chats with them and hears their concerns and goes with them to hospitals and helps them with their benefits. She's not spending $5 million on fancy commercials and hanging out at CPAC with the president's kids on the stage getting a standing ovation. She doesn't care. She's engaging her constituency. Our candidates that spend all this money don't do that.
I agree, and I'm not going to name any names, but yes, there are people who are just look. Listen, don't even get me started on
you and I agree. I know you and I agree.
No, I know we do, and California is crawling with it. But knowing Aja and knowing what her passion is, I was like, this is an unfair criticism of John just because she's pushing back on another issue. So that is
my fear. Listen, in 24, if we win in 24. And Asia's making a dent in 26, great. But that money needs to go to seats that are plus 1D, plus 4D,
that's your
plus
opinion.
5D.
You don't have to call her a rhino then for wanting to try. Maybe
it wasn't what I called her. I called her a rhino on the George Floyd issue. I called her a rhino on the George Floyd issue.
She's not a rhino, but anyways, that's not the worst thing you can call somebody. So we'll get to that.
Fair enough, touche.
The other thing is that it's this idea that, because like you're making a very compelling argument, and I totally agree. Like, what is the point? Like, how are we changing? The GOP isn't anywhere. But when I read your Twitter feed, what I hear is this is Black America's fault for not understanding it, instead of the GOP's fault for not showing up. Because we also both agree that government goes to those who show up. And where is the GOP in any inner city community? We're not like a bunch of animals running around. Sometimes when people are screaming about something, and sometimes when people are mad about something, it's because they have something to be mad about. I deeply regret that this conversation, not ours, but the larger race conversation, has become so political that it's kind of this either or thing. Like, if you do this, then you're white supremacist. And if you do this, then you're like a CRT Kendi, follower. And we have lost the ability to sort of break down where the problems are and be logical about things. And I also think that it is unfair. Black people, we have to be honest that we have not been inviting as well. We're not that inviting.
But Kira, let me say,
white folks who want to come in and talk to us.
Let me say this. The other problem is this. You have got tremendously effective. See, I hate even having this conversation and saying this is a tremendously effective Black politician or Black man or Black woman. I hate even saying that. It cheapens human beings. But you take a guy, one of the most effective people out there. I'll get flamed by some people in law enforcement, but I think one of the most effective public officials, and I'll call him a politician because to some degree he is Jim Craig, the police chief of Detroit. This is a guy who was dealt an incredibly difficult hand, right? He's got a city that virtually has no money. They can barely fund gas in their patrol cars. They can barely pay overtime to their cops. Their equipment's terrible, broken down.
And Gary. Yeah.
But this is a guy who says very pragmatically, this is where we are. this is who's committing crime. He's a black man, but he's a police professional. I'm going to have to take resources out of this area and crime's going to rise, but I got to put it over here because there's a school over here, or I've got to put him over here because there's a retirement community. But you know what he's doing? He's leaving his office and he's engaging and he's explaining why. I'm with you. The Republican Party. Look, if I were running in a predominantly black area as a Republican candidate, I wouldn't be, let's say Baltimore, just for argument's sake. All right, a district in Baltimore. I'm not going to be raising money at country clubs in Florida. I'm not going to be raising money at country clubs in Scottsdale, Arizona. What I'm going to do is small dollar donors. And I'm going to go out and I'm going to find retired black cops. And I'm going to set up community councils in the neighborhood. And I'm going to go out there and I'm going to try even a little bit. Like you say, you got to start making your little dent. I'm going to try to create dialogue between the neighborhood residents and former police officials who have the ear of current police officials. And I'm going to start to create a little bit of trust, because you create a little bit of trust, you create a little bit of dialogue, and that grows. And that's how you change it. These candidates think that they're going to go out, they're going to go to a country club in Scottsdale, Arizona, raise $8 million with the Turning Point guys. God love them. And I get it. It's really fun to be in front of the cameras. You do it, I do it. It's a fun life. But it doesn't change things in these districts. And we can talk about this from these races get too much money and they can't be won. But also, you raise a really important point. Why don't we chip away in these areas? We don't chip away because the strategies suck. But so worried about.
I'll tell you this, John.
Yeah.
One of the reasons we don't chip away is because people like me have to speak for people like you. So, and I mean that in like,
listen, that's a fair point.
You can see these comments on the side, right? And that's just the comments in the chat room. That's not who's going to text me later and tell me that I didn't come hard enough at you or what, like
Listen,
or if I go to my liberal,
come at me. I want you to.
You can take it.
It's important.
If I go to my liberal friends and family, who most of my black friends and family are liberal, that's probably not surprising, right?
I grew up in Queens. Most of my friends are liberals.
Right.
Yeah, you know?
Or I live in California. Like, most people here are going to be liberal. But I can't take, like, if I go and I say, hey, I have all these ideas, here's my, and they go, here's this guy, John Cardillo on Twitter, and look at him. He's a conservative, and look at the things he says about black people, and look at how.
What about Kira? Let me ask you this.
Tweet in here.
Let me ask you this.
Feels like
when I say black men are 6% of the population and commit 55% of the murders, that's FBI data. How is that racist?
Yeah.
Explain to me how that's racist. That's FBI data.
That's data.
I'm called a racist for that night and day.
It's not racist if the data is there for, like, I have this issue with Candace Owens all the time. Like, we say a lot of the same things, but why is she giving me that data? To solve the problem or just to be accusatory? And the problem goes deeper than it's
why is it assumed that I'm being accusatory?
Because of your timeline.
But hold on, Kira. But also my life experience, because I'll guarantee you, I don't know the histories of people on this chat here, but I'd venture a guess that maybe 1% or less ever safeguarded the body of a raped and murdered 9-year-old black child like I did. Ever had in the back of their patrol car molested black children. And I've seen the crime in the black community. And I've seen the effects. I've had to make notifications to mothers that their 14-year-old gangbanging son was shot dead and have them collapse crying. I
wouldn't know any of this, John, by looking at your timeline. And
but,
it's
but
not
they do know. No, I
people don't want anybody.
They don't ask. They assume. So they sit there and say,
here's this tweet that someone posted. Respond to it.
Let me see which one.
Paul posted it. It's a little further up. It says, so Juneteenth is jumping off just like Black spring breaks and Miami's urban beach weekend with shootings and massive brawls.
Yes.
So this is the thing that we always used to have with Hollywood. Like, black folks, now we have the opposite problem. We used to only be gangsters and thugs, and now we're like all like the noble savage. Like,
but what's wrong about that? But Kira, what's incorrect or racist about that? There were massive shootings on Juneteenth and shootings and massive gang fights,
just like Black Spring Break and Miami urban beach.
They had to declare states of emergency in Miami Beach for Black Spring Break and Urban Beach Weekend, and fly in police from 5 other agencies.
Things aren't happening. Why would you post that? But you don't. But I don't see your timeline full of like posts of redneck spring break on.
It's not happening.
That's not true. I know that's not true.
But hold on, it is true
I've been
because
there.
at the time Black Spring Break was happening in Miami Beach and there were shootings and mass riots. Where I live in Fort Lauderdale was regular old spring break, predominantly white. There was one arrest. I drove on to Fort Lauderdale Beach. It's a mile from where I'm sitting. There were none of the same problems. None. So I'm not going to lie and say there were to placate feelings. Again, it goes back to, we can debate why is that happening? Why is it that if you put 1,000 middle-class white kids on Fort Lauderdale Beach and 1,000, they claim to be middle-class Black kids on Miami Beach is crime-ridden and full of violence and Fort Lauderdale Beach isn't? I don't know. I'm not a sociologist, but it is not racist to ask the question. And
are
if
you
we
asking
don't,
the question or are you just making the accusation?
well, I'm
Because
pointing
here's
it out
what
on
Jeff
Twitter.
says. Here's what Jeff says. I think he makes a good point. He says you use these news stories and stats to, and this is what I was getting at with the Hollywood thing. You use these news stories and stats to paint Black people a certain way. You never use their platform to seek solutions or spark productive discussions. It may not be that that's not what you want to do with your platform, but I think it's a valid question. It's obvious that you don't care.
Well, nobody asked. You asked. How long, when you asked me to come on and debate you in a public forum, how long did it take me to say yes?
1 second, right away.
Thank you. No one else has asked me. I'll talk to anybody about it. Look, Kira, let me say this. I want to see every American do well. Nothing would make me happier than to wake up tomorrow morning, turn on the news, and find out that young Black men were no longer committing disproportionate crime, were attending college at record rates and getting jobs on Wall Street making six figures. Because then we all win. Everybody wins. Everybody wins. The car salesman who's selling more cars win. You and I win with more sponsors. My business has more customers. You have a bigger audience who can buy from your sponsors and your sponsors have more. Everyone wins. No one wants to say, are there racists out there? Yes, of course there are. But any rational, decent-minded person would love to wake up tomorrow and see that that's not happening. Unfortunately, it's not the case. And unless we ask the tough questions as to why it's happening, but more important, why are there statues of George Floyd? Because here's what's going to happen. A young Black child out there, maybe was born today, last week, one day they're going to walk by that statue in Newark. And history is going to be so revisionist that George Floyd, a career criminal who abandoned 5 children, abandoned one son who's now in his 30s when he was 5 years old, who put the gun in the belly of a pregnant woman and served prison time, who was a meth and fentanyl addict, has a statue. And there are plenty of people out there who don't. Black men who went to work,
let's stop
who
on
don't.
here.
But why are we glorifying that?
Oh no,
why is it so accepted?
I want to explore this further because this is another. This brought up like the whole Catherine Watson thing, and if you didn't know who she was, and blah blah blah. There is a statue of her. I
knew all that.
I understood John's point. I got John's point.
Yeah,
I did. I understood. He was being a dick in that argument, but I totally understood that point, which was a lot of you people out there don't know that this woman exists, but y'all know that George Floyd exists. And I'm kind of with him on this thing. Like, we don't need to be erecting George Floyd statues. Like, the man wasn't a statue guy, but I love what Dave Chappelle said about it. He said, George Floyd isn't the guy because he was a saint. He's the guy because he was the one who was there. And in the Black community, there is a huge distrust of law enforcement. There's a huge distrust of white people in general. There is a feeling that the Black community has been abandoned both by the left and by the right. I think the only good news that's coming out lately is that at the very least, a lot of Black people are just kind of fed up with the left not coming through.
Let me ask you this, Kira. Do you know who Corey Jones is?
No.
Okay. And that's a problem. And let me tell you who Corey Jones is. Corey Jones is a Black man who was wrongfully killed by a Palm Beach Gardens police officer down here.
Mm-hmm.
I had actually taught a seminar with the cop at a local university, a policing seminar. I was supportive of the cop's prosecution, his conviction, his incarceration. Why? Corey Jones was a hell of a good guy. Came from a great family. He was a hardworking guy. He played in a band that actually played at bars where the cops would go. They loved him. Mm-hmm. He was a concealed weapons license holder. He was a law-abiding citizen. His car broke down. The cop had horrible tactics, was trigger happy, and killed this poor guy for no reason. Do you know why you don't know who Corey Jones is? Because Corey Jones's family had dignity and class and didn't hire Ben Crump. They handled it quietly and with dignity. I would be for a statue to Corey Jones all day long. Look, this is what could happen. This was a good guy. This was a hard worker.
Fair enough. Okay, this is a great point.
He was a good man. And I'll tell you something. Every cop I know down here, every single one, bar none, was okay with the prosecution of the cop. They knew this guy. They thought he was a hell of a good guy. No one knows his name.
This comes back to a point I always make about showing up. Mm-hmm. And like, you just educated me on who this guy was. Why don't I know who this guy was? Because the family was, quote, classy. It didn't go get some race hustler. But you know what? This is the argument I hear with the Tamir Rice case before, which is like, I've heard conservatives say to me, this does look like a case that has some merit here, but the mom went and hired Al Sharpton. She went and hired Rainbow Push. Yeah. Okay, well, you tell me the conservative outlet that went and offered this woman help. We're talking about a poor family. Government goes to those who show up, and so does support. And it's unfair for us to say it's not fair that the people in these Black neighborhoods are gravitating towards the race hustlers that just want to use them and exploit them, and we're not even sending anyone in their stead.
That's a good point, though.
Making the choice to say, hey, Miss Rice, we want to send you a lawyer and help you get justice for your son. So it's not a fair.
I think, here was the other problem with that case, right? Tamir Rice was a little boy. All right, this case was the tactics, again, the police tactics I criticize night and day. You don't roll up. That was just moronic. He was a little kid. But where were the parents? Why was a 14-year-old kid out there waving around a realistic looking gun? That is not even the point that I'm trying to bring up now. But it's got to be. Cases, no, it doesn't have to be, because otherwise we can go down that rabbit hole, and that's going to be a whole different show. I think you're right. Yes, that's a whole different topic that deserves.
My point is just that is just whatever you think of the case, it's not fair to brush off Black people because they take so much help from the race hustling left when there's no other alternative. So
I don't think that you know, the other problem with the Floyd case was people were dying alone in nursing homes, not allowed to have funerals, and Floyd got the funeral of a head of state.
You don't have to convince me. I was like,
that was the optics. The optics of that turned. Hell, I had Black friends that turned off. I had Hispanic friends that turned off. Like, wait a second. I go out, I work hard all day long. My relatives are 5 states away. I can't go visit them, but this guy's got a gilded casket. Come on. I mean, that one turned a lot of people off. So I think that's where the left and those race hustlers like Crump and Sharpton and Jackson, where they go overboard. And then they start to turn off, hardworking middle-class Blacks, Hispanics, et cetera. I mean, decent-minded people look at that and say, well, my grandmother is in a nursing home by herself, could die tomorrow. This guy's got 5,000 people in the street and a head of state funeral. And that's got to end as well.
Do you think that Black people have a case when they say there's still a lot of racism in this country? We deal with law enforcement in a way that is a lot more aggressive than other populations, and police brutality in the Black community is a problem?
Well, I think statistically, it's no. In terms of brutality, let me start at the end and go backward. I think statistically, we know that police shoot more whites than Blacks. It's very important. All right, look, you can't look at it
because that's numbers. That's statistic. There are more whites in America than Black people.
But right, you can't look at there's more whites than Blacks. Right? Fair mistake. You got to look at it in interactions with the police. And historically, interactions with the police break down pretty simply. It's about 40% of them are Black, 40% of them are white, and 20% are the all other various races. And in that white and Black are the white and Black Hispanics who look either white or Black, right? In that scenario, police are shooting whites more than Blacks. Even more importantly, what we call a discretionary shooting. So a non-discretionary shooting is you and I are partners, we're in a patrol car. We get out of our car to get a coffee, somebody points a gun at us. That's non-discretionary. Right? We got to shoot at them, we're going to be dead. A discretionary shooting is they're going to hit somebody else over the head with a baseball bat. It would be legal for us to shoot them, and it'd be legal
like
for
that girl who went after the other girl with the knife.
Well, no, that was non-discretionary because the knife is deadly. But it would be, there's two big guys fighting. One is a bat. The other guy might defend himself. You could use a taser. We could tackle him, but we could also use the gun. They shoot whites more often there as well. Okay, so statistically, there is a cherry-picked false narrative when it comes to deadly use of force being applied more to Blacks.
Okay.
I also think but you do need that. To your first question, do police react to blacks differently than whites? I think you got to look at it geographically. And certain areas, yes. Then you ask yourself, why? Now, are there pockets in rural America where there are no blacks? Yes. And would a local rural county sheriff be a little suspicious, maybe, deputy? Possibly. I'm not going to be so naive and say that wouldn't happen. But when you go into a neighborhood like I worked in, you can't look at everything in the abstract. You also rely on training and experience. If a police officer has a car of 4 young black men at 3 o'clock in the morning on Burnside Avenue in the Bronx, in an area known for drug, gang, and gun activity, he's probably going to yank them out of the car, put them on the ground at gunpoint, and toss the car. It's legal to do. It's constitutional. Is it because they're black? No. And this has been my other problem with profiling. Everybody says, well, profiling is terrible. It's not. Profiling and monitoring are effective tools of policing. I'm Italian American. If you're going to go after La Cosa Nostra, the Italian mob, you better profile somebody who looks like me. It would be really stupid to profile somebody who looks like you.
When we don't have a disagreement on profile, I'll just stop you there.
What I'm saying is,
so we can.
But what I'm saying, let me just finish this thought, and then I'll shut up. So there are many incidents where the police are vilified. They pulled these 4 young black men out of a car.
Sure.
But they never give you the context that in that area, men fitting their description did multiple armed robberies. You never hear that context. You get that, 30 seconds of cell phone video and the police are vilified. And that's what I don't like.
What do you guys think in the chat room? Because I agree with this, that there are things that, and I'm actually going to break this down on my show. Like, there are some hard truths that we have to face as a black community. And so I think it's unfair to pretend that they're not there. But you didn't answer the question.
No, ask me and I'll give you a direct answer. Do I think there's racism in the world?
Is there police brutality?
I don't think
police brutality is an issue in black communities.
No, I don't think brutality is prevalent. I don't think brutality is prevalent anymore, Kira, because there's cell phone cameras, body cameras. You'd have to be a moron. Look, did Chauvin get away with it? I mean, if the cop's not wearing a body cam, look, I don't think there was enough evidence to convict Chauvin. That's a whole nother show. But was the incident memorialized? It was. I don't know where you'd be in the world today if somebody didn't have a cell. I did business in Belgrade, Serbia. I was 2 hours outside of Belgrade in the middle of nowhere, Serbia, a month ago, near the Bosnian border. Every server in a little mountainside restaurant I went to had a new iPhone. So I don't know where you'd go in the world these days where somebody didn't have a device in their pocket that could take a photo or video.
Let me posit this to you then on the other side of this, because I've talked about this at length on my show. And one of the things that I agree with is that the statistics are blown way out of proportion, and it makes the conversation difficult. But like I said earlier, if sometimes when people are mad about something, it could be that they have something to be mad about. And so the impression I get from you a lot is that we have nothing to be mad about. Why are black people upset? And I do think that there is a perception issue, and black people, we too need to understand the part we play in the perceptions that get projected that make us look scary. But there are times when, like, I live in a nice affluent neighborhood now, and my husband has been pulled over for no reason several times. It's, what that's called. It's called driving while black. It happens. Now, he's a Mr. Rogers looking kind of guy. He wears a cardigan to work. He never is worried about it. He explains where he's going, but that doesn't happen to all my other friends around here. And the other thing, one thing that really changed my view on this and really just got me in the gut was in Gary, I'm still having a huge problem with crime and the lack of police presence because there just wasn't the budget for it. And we were having a big problem with police brutality. There were a couple of shootings. There were a couple of really sketch incidents. And this Hispanic cop wrote an op-ed in the Times. And he said, look, people don't understand that when I come into the community, I don't come in for your education parades. I'm seeing the worst of you. I'm seeing the worst that is happening. And all I see is degradation and pain and guys killing their grandmas. And that's all I see. So I take that home outside of the community, I take that home, and does it start to, after 10 years doing this job, does it start to make me feel like every Black man I encounter is going to be a threat? Yes. Does that make me a racist? I don't know. Am I ashamed of it? Yes, but I don't know how to change it. So I just
I think that's a fair analysis.
Yeah, there's
I give merit to that.
This and that, right? It's like, it's a lot. And
Look,
so we're having to fight these stereotypes. Like, even right now in my community, I'm having an issue with my daughter. She went to a babysitting job last night. She's 13. She knocked on the door. She peeked in the window. It was the wrong house. She went to the right house. Now she's on the Ring app as a suspicious person. We're the only Black family in this neighborhood. She's on the Ring app as a suspicious person.
That's unfortunate. I mean,
if the little girl with pigtails next door is doing that, are they saying this is suspicious? Now, here's my problem. Here's my thing with it. Whatever, it's getting resolved, whatever. But the issue is that now my daughter, the post has been taken down, but now hundreds of people have seen my daughter with the word suspicious next to her, and it was easier. They're not racist. It was easier for them to look at her and say, she doesn't look like she belongs in this neighborhood. It's easier to make her suspicious. So there are these things that we have to deal with as well, right? That are very real things that aren't just people bitching. And some of it is people just bitching, but some of it.
But I agree.
Who are like, help us out here, like we're struggling.
I agree with you. And it does happen. And it's unfortunate, especially with a little kid. It's terrible. But let me say something that might surprise your viewers. And if they go back in my history, they'll see I'm not just saying this. I always thought George Zimmerman should be in prison. I never thought Trayvon Martin did anything wrong. In fact, the way I interpreted Florida's Castle Doctrine is Zimmerman was the one in the wrong. Look, I don't want to hear it was a gated community, this and that, because it wasn't gated, number one. But we're in the United States of America. Trayvon Martin had every right to walk down a sidewalk. I don't care if it was 5 o'clock in the morning. What he didn't have or shouldn't have had was some weirdo following him around. I'm a 17-year-old guy. I've got some 20-something-year-old weirdo following me around in a car. I might, hide in the bush, jump out and start trying to beat the shit out of him as well, because I don't want to get molested, right? So I always had a very big problem with conservatives exalting George Zimmerman. I thought that guy I talked to cops up there. They thought he was a nut. He was a wannabe mall cop, rent-a-cop. He couldn't even hack at his neighborhood watch. He washed out of that. And so, yes, there is that problem. But unfortunately, nobody ever, by the way, I was very vocal about that. I got shit kicked out of me on Twitter, Facebook for taking that position. Nobody remembers that one, right? They only remember my George Floyd statues. But nobody remembers my position on that. Mm-hmm. But does it happen? It absolutely does. And do I think that certain cops are conditioned? And that's the one that'll keep you up at night. A guy like your husband, a kid like your daughter. It shouldn't happen. It does. And is it the result of years and years? And here's the other problem in policing, right? There have been people who said, well, you got to recycle the cops out of the neighborhoods. But at the end of the day, there's a lot to be said for having a cop who knows the neighborhood, who knows the resident, who knows the merchants, who knows the store owners, who knows who should and shouldn't be there. And as difficult as it is, eventually there comes a point where your husband drives by and they say, oh, yeah, that's the guy who lives at 123 Main Street. He's a good guy. Now, it shouldn't have gotten to that point anyway. I don't know if there's a solution to that one, to be honest with you. I think that's going to be many, many, many years of police community interaction to solve that one. We're not going to solve that anytime soon. And
it's something that we live with, and it's just an unfortunate. I mean, I think racism is sin, and so is sin going to go away? No, there's only one, solution for sin. So there's that. But I do sometimes think, like, I'm looking at the stuff you're saying online and I'm thinking, why does it feel like he hates me? Why does it feel
I don't hate anybody.
But why does it feel like you have disdain for the Black community?
You're making me feel bad now. Listen,
okay, no, I'm just telling you how I'm viewing it, and I want you to respond.
I grew up in the most mixed neighborhood in the world in Queens. The funny thing is, my friends, Black, Hispanic, they call me and they laugh. They're like, do they know where you grew up? But it says, Kira, we are getting inundated daily, being told we're white supremacists, we're Nazis. Yet somebody has to push back against the narrative. And I do it in a way. And my overall message is, you don't like how this feels, do you? We don't like how it feels being told that when we wake up in the morning, we're Nazis and white supremacists and want to oppress people. I don't care who you are. Do a good job. You're my dentist. My dentist was a Black woman recently. She did a great job. I had no pain the next day. God bless her. I recommend 10 people to her. I'm not going to her because she's not fucking stupid, right?
Right. I don't. Right. It's like I don't
Yeah.
think that, but it just feels like, oh my gosh, like I read these things and I'm like, I cringe because I'm like, I could like, I hope no one I know that I'm trying to, but the difference between us also, and folks, you need to realize this is that John is a reactionary, like that is what he does, right? He's a tweeter. He's a like he you said it. I do sound bites, right? I have an hour-long podcast where I talk by myself for an hour, and I
used to do that on air. Yeah.
You know, I do that. So it's a whole different thing, but it is like, I think it's fair. And I want people to understand, like, I get that there's a lot of people mad because they hate the way that John is on Twitter, which is what started this conversation. But I think that it is really important to understand that he has a voice too. He's trying to tell you that these things, he's saying some things that are hurtful to him, right? And I say this all the time, grace has to go both ways. And someone has to be the person who will say, all right, I'm going to lay aside my right to be offended here. Otherwise, we're just going to be, what's that? It's that scene in The Office where they're all, you know, that's all we're going to be. So don't criticize John too. I get, he's a dick on Twitter. I get it.
But Kira, look at one of these comments. So some guy Edward goes, quote, I have a black dentist with roll eyes. So if I say anything,
right,
to basically say, look, I'm not going to classify anybody there, I'm automatically a racist.
Right.
That's a problem too. So you use an anecdote to say, look, I don't really give a shit about anybody's race. If they do a good job, they're a professional, they're proficient, and you're a racist for acknowledging that. So you and I both, there are some people with whom you're never going to win, right? But my point for doing it is, you want to call me a white supremacist all day. You want to tell my teenage niece and my middle school, my teenage nephew and my middle school niece, they're white supremacists for waking up. You can't cry when I push back. It works both ways.
It does work both ways. Is there a way that it could work where you aren't insulting us all the time? Can it work that
invite me on air. You and I had a nice conversation.
We're having a decent conversation. Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I guess this is working. Danita says he can't tell me nothing about my black experience, period. Are you trying to tell me about my black experience?
No.
Do you think that you know everything that goes on in the black community?
I don't know anything about what goes on in the black community. I've never, I policed it, but that was a very outside looking in a point of view. And like that police officer you referenced who wrote that op-ed, we only saw the worst. You don't call, everybody loves firemen. They come and they rescue you. You know, they save your cat from a tree. Everybody loves firemen. You never hear anybody say, oh my God, that fireman is racist. Mm-hmm. They say, the cops show up at the worst time in your life. And they only see oftentimes the worst, or they're telling you about the worst thing that happened to your family member, your kid. And so, you know, your worldview is shit. So no, I don't know anything about the black community. I didn't grow up in the black community. I'm going to grow up in a mixed neighborhood, but it's still different.
Do you think that people like me, and we're going to wrap this up because we're going on an hour now, but I want to respect your time, but do you think that people, Lisa says, I love y'all, but we need to be more honest. At least I feel like this is a very honest conversation. I do. I've literally called John a dick like 50 times on this conversation. So like, I think this is a very honest conversation. It's not always going to go the way you want, guys. I'm not somebody else where it's just going to be attack. I'm in the business of persuasion. And in fact, that is why John agreed to come on this show, because I said, hey, I don't think I can explain my position in 280 characters. Would you allow me to have a conversation with you? So that's why we're here. I'm not, if you're coming here for Kira to tear down John Cardillo, that's not what I do.
But also, Kira, you asked me, and I respect your work. I don't care about your race. I don't care about your gender. If you had a blank AVI up in the name Kira Davis, which is a pretty racially generic name, I would have come on anyway, because I knew of you. I knew your content. I respect it, you know, and you're not afraid to punch back. More people need to do this. You know, I'll do my sound bites on Twitter, but listen, I'll go on anybody's show. I've always said that. I don't care which side of the I did Don Lemon show. They never invited me back, you know. But I'd go back on, but they don't want to hear it. You did. I'll talk to anybody.
Danita says, Kira, you're awesome and so sweet, but I battle people like him every day. And how's that going? How's that going? You know, I don't want John and I are both Americans, and I don't want John to be my enemy, and that's why I invited him to have this conversation. I would like to persuade him that sometimes I feel his rhetoric makes my job way more difficult, but that doesn't mean that I think he's made some good points here tonight, and it's fair to acknowledge that. And also, John, sometimes you're a dick, and
listen, I know that
you're making it harder for me. But you're making it harder for me. Like, do you think that we're making up a lot of these accusations of racism and stuff? Like, I told you.
You know what I think. It's a really great question. It's one of the best ways you could have ended this. I think that the people on your chat timeline here, I think, really do have good intentions. I think they truly believe in their hearts what they're saying. And I think, like most Americans, they're victims of a very dishonest media that cherry picks data, stats, and stories. And I think that if the media was more honest about stats, about race relations, you know what's funny, Kira? I guarantee you that I could walk into a bar with 99% of the people commenting, you're the ones telling me how much they hate me, buy them a couple of shots, buy them a couple of drinks. We'll be chatting and laughing about this.
I know it.
About how absurd it all is.
I've been in this business long enough.
Right? One-on-ones, Americans are Americans. The media is trying to drive this wedge. And quite often, when I post the sensational stuff or stuff that's offensive, it's really pushing back at them for the narrative they create. It's not designed to insult anyone or demean anyone. And I really do believe that. I believe that pretty much everybody, even Ross Schumann that I argued with all day, I'd still buy him a drink and try to find common ground, even though he's been a dick all day on Twitter. We did agree. I didn't give him the credit. I see he's on here, but we did agree on guns earlier. He did a good job on that. I'll give credit where he did.
And I know you both agree on more.
He did a good job on guns. My point is, I think I'll just wrap it up. As individuals, I think we buy each other drinks and all get along. That's why I don't let the media
say that all the time. Yeah.
Either. Yeah.
The liberal hosts I've been on with, people don't even know that this is such a facade. We argue in front of the camera, and then we go out to dinner together. Like, it's so all the time. It's such a manipulation half of the time.
I was on Dr. Drew's show for 4 years as like the conservative white cop that everybody hated, and what people don't know is we'd all go for pizza every time I was in LA after the show, and everybody laughed about it. So,
Drew's the coolest. No, there's room, and even there's room to fundamentally disagree. And to feel like you don't get it. Like, my friend Nick Searcy's in the chat room. Nick is like, his nickname is Nick the Dick. He's a real ass on Twitter.
Yeah, Nick and I were buddies, and he unfollowed me on Twitter because we got.
You must have said something that pissed him off.
Wait, here's what I wasn't conservative enough. I wasn't hardcore enough.
I believe that. And Kurt Schlichter is a friend of mine too, and they're both
Kurt's one of my best friends. Yeah.
Yes, they're horrible people on Twitter, but these are people that are. Wonderful people, truly wonderful people. And I think if you just judged them by their timeline, you would. And so anyways, I'm not trying to defend you, or you've done a great job of defending yourself. And I don't know that we've changed each other's mind on anything, but I appreciate you being open to the discussion. And I would like to say that, John, there was no hesitancy. There wasn't, let me put limits on this. Let me have, here's what I need to show up on your stream. It was like, let's do it. So I definitely believe we need more of these. I don't know that your Twitter timeline is helping people like me, but I would love to have more discussions like this.
You know what I think needs to be done? And I've been talking with guys like Ned Ryan and all that, is that we've been talking about doing these in person around the country, a panel of like me, you, and Ned, even somebody from the far left, even a Ben Crump type. Get them on stage in a room with people. I think that really is more impactful, especially if you have like a reception before or after, when everybody that hates each other walking in can chat afterward. And that's something we're going to be seriously looking at. I was talking to Bernie Carrick about it as well, the former police commissioner in New York. And it's something we're really going to be looking at now that everything's opening up again into the next year, putting together across the country.
Yeah, we're definitely not going to solve any problems on Twitter, but or in an hour long YouTube video. And I would love to be a part of conversations. I'm not sure how I feel about how productive public conversations are these days, just because I just think, and I say this, like, the race discussion requires a type of honesty from both sides of the fence. And I'm talking from black and white perspective here. I know there's other races, but I'm black. And so that's where my interest is. It requires a level of honesty that I'm not sure we're even allowed to have right now.
Good point.
And for the uncomfortable things and the accusatory things, and also it is something that requires each party to come to the table laying down their right to be offended.
Yeah,
And
I agree.
it's really hard to do because everybody has a butt. Everybody starts with a
I'm
butt.
thick-skinned.
But what
I
you
get
seem
abused
like
all
it,
day. I'm fine.
John. Tell people where they can find you.
Just go to @JohnCardillo on Twitter. You'll be so pissed off. You'll hate me.
I like.
You'll be agreeing with
to
Kira that I'm
control his
such a
timeline.
dick.
Don't call me a rhino anymore, dude. That's not
Deal.
cool. You don't need to call every person disagrees with you a rhino.
Fine. Kira's not a rhino.
All right. Good
Mea
guys.
culpa.
Is this a success? Did I change John Cardillo? I changed his entire life in one hour broadcast.
It's
amazing. All right.
There's a bottle of vodka over there. It's going to disappear right now. Kira, thanks.
I'm waiting for my whiskey. All right, John. We'll talk again.
You got it. Anytime.
All right. Blessings to you. Have a good night. All right. I'm going to stay on here for a minute. You want to recap this? See what happened here. There are a lot of people. I've been reading your comments. Thank you so much, everybody, for showing up. Agent wants a Twitter apology. That's fair. I also did not like being called a rhino, but I do think that two things in that discussion are true. One is that there's Cardillo's social media presence and there's his personal presence, right? And they don't seem to line up. And is that fake? I don't know. I don't think so. And I say this because the people we pointed out before are like friends of mine who are like, I don't know. They're not saying all the same things, even about other Black people but we're friends. I know where their hearts are. We disagree on cause and effect and those things. I know that being an asshole on Twitter is a shtick. It's a job, you know? I know that he deflected on some of those questions. I tried to bring him back, but I also just wanted to let him run and let him talk his way through this stuff. Danita, thank you, Danita, by the way, for being here and being so vocal. Your comments were really challenging. And he says he's too Trumpy. Are you talking about John now? He's too Trumpy for my Republican taste. Fair enough. That's totally fair. Darvia says he doesn't realize that his social media content poisons the well. And that, you heard me going back to that. And that's the thing. And I struggle with this, to be honest. I do struggle with this because it's the same thing with my Candace stuff. Like, on the one hand, I'm all about persuasion and giving people reasons to come over to this side and vote as a conservative or as a Republican, because I believe that conservative values and principles are going to be the quickest way to prosperity for all Americans, but particularly for Black Americans. And so I want to persuade people. And this is what the comment that came up too, is like, I think Danita said, you don't know anything about my Black experience, right? And it's like, you can't make someone have your experience, and I wish I could put him in this body for a second and make him have this experience. He can't have the experience I have of going to my Black family and friends and them being Twitter addicts and reading his timeline and going, defend that for me, Kira. Then I've gotten good, I think, at deflecting from that, right? My thing always is, I'm not a conservative because of other conservatives. So I have no defense to make I don't have to make a defense of John or anybody that might seem offensive. But it does make it harder, right? He can't live this life and know that it's really hard to bring this message when it just feels like constant criticism. But he did acknowledge that was an argument that he really hadn't thought about. Performative art on Twitter does not solve community issues, which is why I had John on here. And a lot of you were saying he's lying, that he's a hack, this isn't who he is. And yet what he said on this stream was different than what he said on Twitter, right? So maybe there is I guess I was just going around the long way around of saying that I've come to accept that some people are entertainers and some people are activists. And is it fair for me to judge the entertainers? I can like them or not like them, but is it fair for me to judge them? Is it fair for me to judge Candace as an influencer when she's not? She's an entertainer. So should I criticize her as an influencer? It's complicated because she is influential. I don't know if but that's not really her doing, is it? That's her fans. Her fans have decided that she should be very influential, and they make her as such. Is John an influencer, or is he just a guy with a Twitter account and he has one thing on Twitter and another when you actually dig into it? Like, is he just entertaining people? Should I expect him to make my job easier? Is that even his job? I don't know. I did get him to apologize for the rhino stuff. It's silly. So yeah, I don't know if we solved anything, but I like John. I didn't have a problem with him. And like I say, he jumped right in and wanted to talk and was willing. And I haven't had one single bad interaction with him. And yeah, so I don't know how many more of these conversations are worth having, but I just think the conversation is worth having. Like, even if I don't change anybody's mind, even if I don't do it right, I know there's a lot of people who are always going to be like I am not the type of person that's going to sit and yell. I want a conversation and I want to be able to hear the hard things. You guys, it's not a shtick for me. When I say that people have to be willing to hear the hard things and give up your right to be offended, I'm living it out. So that when a guy like John or someone, someone worse is sitting in front of me and willing to have a conversation, I can't come into the conversation going, I hate you, because what you're saying is I have to be willing to be offended by what they say and then respond. And so that is the approach I took with John. And I think it's the approach he took with me too. I have to be willing to be offended. Even if I don't like everything he's saying, he deserves to have it said. How can I respond to a bad idea I cannot hear? So thank you to John for tuning in. Thank you to you guys for tuning in. You can share this stream with other people if they want to. I don't know how productive it was, but no. Hey, go download my podcast. I'm about to hit record downloads this month. Y'all can help me. Go to Just Listen to Yourself. Find that on Spotify, iTunes, and download it. And if you're on iTunes, leave a rating and review. That really helps a lot. Helps me to have conversations like this. And then I'm doing a live show in Cleveland. We'll have some special guests and we'll have some more hard conversations, maybe not exactly like this one, but kind of like this one, and where we'll be, I'll be asking some pressing questions of my guests and we'll really be raw and honest. I'm not going to pull punches for you. Because I respect my audience enough to be intelligent to know what to take and what to throw away. So Cleveland, go to eventbrite.com, look up Just Listen to Yourself and buy your tickets. It's a really small venue. So get in now, get your tickets now and help support that. We're going to have a really great time. And I'm going to do a meet and greet afterwards. So if you want to get pictures, autographs, do we do autographs anymore? Do people collect autographs anymore? Seems like pictures are the new autographs. So, but I'll sign whatever. I mean that. Will I regret it? I don't know. You guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for being in the comments and for your support. I really appreciate it. I wasn't sure how it was going to go, and just seeing some of your faces in there was really comforting to me. And thank you to John for agreeing to come in and get grilled. Let's give the guy some credit. He came to get grilled, and he did. All right, you guys, that's it. Subscribe to the channel. Subscribe to the things. Go to davisnation.locals.com and come over to our community. We'll continue this conversation in lots of different ways over there. And we don't shout each other down or insult each other when we hear something that we don't like. We practice making our arguments, and more of us need to do that. Okay, bye guys. Love you all.